Making my way downtown, walking fast, faces passing zone back.
Sorry.
This is what
Tanya.
happens when we can hear our own voices.
Yeah, I mean, I am recording now, and that will be a cult.
Rachel, Rachel, like we've never actually recorded this where we can hear ourselves live. So you're experiencing this is what happens.
It's disgusting. What? It's Tanya, by the way.
Oh, sorry. Why did I say Rachel?
Call Tanya Rachel.
Who did I?
Who is Rachel?
I don't think I've actually met a Rachel in a long time. Sorry, Tanya. I thought you were Rachel.
It's okay. It happens.
Does it though? Does it though, Tanya?
Should it though, Tanya? That's more important. No, no, it should. No.
It's an impression.
It's awful. Of Gelb. Gelb's a terrible person.
Are you ready, Rachel?
There's so many words that could be said there. I'm not Rachel. That's what this episode should be called. No, let's not title it that based on pre-banter. Oh dear. Oh, welcome to the Ancient Robot Games podcast. As always, I am Dougal.
And I'm Gelb.
And we are joined by the inimitable, I know it's a word now.
It is.
Tanya Floaker. Tanya, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
It's good. For people unaware, this is our first ever online...
Fully remote.
Partially remote? We're not.
Neither of us are remote.
No. We're together.
And Tanya's not actually that far remote.
Not that far at all.
Around the corner.
Definitely not in Fife. We have maybe been over this already.
Established.
Tanya, thank you so much for coming to join us. Would you like to tell the people at home what you do and possibly give them a hint as to why we've invited you onto the podcast?
Okay, sure. My name's Tanya Floaker. I'm a games designer and consultant and occasional editor. And I've been releasing games under my own steam now for the past 5 years. Before that, I was involved heavily in sort of various clubs and societies around Scotland, running LARP festivals, that kind of thing. In recent years, I've been doing my own indie publishing. And so my first game was BC New, a game about surveillance and control. I went on to do a few other things, a sort of like weird fringe narrative war game, roleplay game thing called Lo Thy Dread Empire. And my last release was Chums, a game about parenting and caring for kids and the drama that comes up as somebody in that position. And then in February, it's going to be Zine Month / Zine Quest / whatever the next platform wants to call itself, promotion for February. And so I'm going to try and release another game. So I'd maybe like to talk a little bit about that as well.
No, we're not having it. That sounds ridiculous. How could we do such a thing? No.
Great podcast. Bye, everyone.
Bye. That was great. No, it's really cool you're making a new thing. I remember hearing about your tabletop games first for BCing You, which is a very cool boxed tabletop RPG because there's some cool things in there that I'm not going to spoil for other people. I want to know how it is going from doing indie RPG stuff for yourself in, for example, this boxed form, but then, as you say, you've been doing things in very different ways. Every single item I think that you come through and you do produce is something so completely different from anything previously that you have done with the Connection Machine, with Mum's Chums, for example, and Lo Thy Dread Empire. I can't think of two things more disparate than a tabletop war gaming game with narrative stuff attached to undead necromantic things and the drama that comes from having kids. I want to know how, was this because it came personally from you and I want to do all of these different things? Was this something where you wanted to kind of challenge yourself to do something different every time? Or is this kind of just naturally the way that you work with these games?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different paths to look down here. The first is the games look disparate. Some of them look disparate on the surface. However, I would say there's an underlying set of connective tissue, some connective themes running through all my work. I would say that they look at connection and different aspects of connection and the way in which we relate to one another. That's really important to myself. I can't divorce the games I create from my outlook on the world. So I come out from a background of involvement with, I guess gets termed community activism or trade union activism, and I come at it from a sort of anarchist communist perspective. So I look at things in terms of the social relations at play and how people relate to one another and how like wider classes relate to one another, like classes of people, whether that be social class, economic class, identity, all these sorts of strands of thought coming together. And I take a look at them through my different games. So Be Seeing You is a game about surveillance and control, and it's about independence as well. And it's sort of almost a homage and also a sort of subtle critique of the TV show The Prisoner. The title comes straight from the sort of little phrase they say in the village as they're walking about, and the sort of premise of living in a sort of micro state that's under heavy surveillance comes directly from that TV show. But it also draws from a lot of other dystopian media and also just from real life politics and real life art. Real life art. Oh, that's a weird. Anyway.
Fake death art is also a thing. So.
Yeah, I love my imaginary art. It's my favorite type.
So you can tell it's late in the evening. So yeah, that sort of idea of I felt like the Prisoner, I love the TV show, but I feel like it's got a very individualist mindset in some ways. It's about the individual against this sort of like overarching control. And it poses the question of, can we overcome sort of systemic problems or sort of like external control as an individual? And I felt like its answer was, it isn't that I want to put forward a strong answer. It's more, I just felt like the way in which it posed the question didn't open up the space in the way I thought it deserved. So I made a game that answered that. It came about because a friend was looking for a game to play The Prisoner in and was unhappy with the alternatives. There's been some options for playing The Prisoner in the past. You had the GURPS splat book that covered it, but it's quite rare to get hold of. Even if you can have a little look at it, you're still playing GURPS, so if it's not your cup of tea, it's maybe not what you were looking for. And so I was just in the middle of deciding what I was going to do for that year's National Game Development Month in Agademon. It's sort of like a once a year game jam that's been happening for 15 years now, where you try and design and play and talk about a game all in a single month, all in November. It's like NaNoWriMo, if anyone out there has heard of that, where you write a novel in a single month. So I gave it a go, and at the end of the month I had a game. I had pretty much most of the layout and the art done, and I put it out there. And I'm quite happy with the sort of statement that makes. But then if you move into, from that also what was going on around about the same time, we were in the midst of lockdowns for COVID. I was finding the general response to COVID disappointing, in the sense of we were in the midst of a pandemic. I felt like there was talk of a new normal having to come about, but nothing actually changed. We haven't had a new normal. We basically had an imposition of the norm without making any real changes to ventilation in schools or workplaces or thinking about airborne viruses and looking after people who have vulnerabilities. None of that's actually happened. So the kind of despondence and upset I had with the way society was being forced to function, it looked like there was large powers at play as to why these things weren't changing. I felt like there was like a sort of groundswell of like these mutual aid groups, people wanting to look out for one another, real sort of like care for one another. And it was kind of squashed. It was squashed by this general overarching, no, we've got to go back to normal. Workplaces have to reopen. We have to think like, but there was actually some sweet moments where in the stillness, people were both swamped by the amount of work that was maybe put on them, especially parents, carers, that sort of people who are dealing with sort of feminized reproductive labor. But also there was a moment where pollution levels were dropping. People were looking out for one another. There was this care at work. And so Lo Thy Dread Empire, which is a sort of narrative war game, was sort of like a place for me to take my frustrations and my worries and place it in this sort of grim, over-the-top, grim-dark setting. It was like a war game about something that was that the sort of death cults of capitalism had won. They had taken over reality. It got to a point where reality itself was being torn apart by their sort of need to consume. And so that sort of like idea of connection and disconnection comes back through there.
How do you go about then taking, quite heavy topics and also doing honor to your own feelings about the topics that you're putting into these games? Like, how do you take all that and do justice to it when thinking about the process of abstraction that like mechanics demand? Like you have to abstract this somehow, and so how does that play into figuring out how what mechanics you're going to be using in different ways in order to elicit those similar types of emotional responses that you're going for?
Well, you've used a couple of things that I'd want to hit on, is like the mechanics and the emotional responses, because I know there's and no shade to people who come at this differently. It's we've got all different designers have different angles. I'm not a designer that comes at things from I'll just make a module and this could plug into any system. That just sort of bounces off me in terms of the type of thing I'll flick through a module. I'll maybe steal an idea from it if I see something really that stands out. But I kind of feel like ideas in and of themselves are 10 a penny. I don't really get a lot out of that sort of like school of let's just have lots of like big module books. I feel like when I sit down to play a game, I want something that helps me and helps the people I'm with and gives us a framework to both help elicit specific emotional responses and to change our expectations as to what's happening, or to help as part of the magic circle of play that's there as part of our gaming experience. And so when I'm designing a game, the feedback I'm listening to as I'm playtesting and playing the game for the first few times and then honing it down, is I'm trying to listen to what people are saying they feel during play. So I'll jump forward to my current game that I'm going to be releasing, which is...
No, we weren't going to talk about... No, I'm joking. Please do. No, please do.
There's a good reason I'm jumping forward to this. I can talk a bit more about this later, but we're in the midst playtest, okay? And one of the playtesters after the game, and the game looks at sort of like ideas of nostalgia and toxic nostalgia in your past and reconciling with the past in amongst this sort of like high breakneck action, sort of occult mystery, interpersonal drama sort of trappings. And the feedback I got was, well, Tanya, one of the players, sits down. I'm really loving this game. I love the sort of the melodrama of it. I like the build up. I love the way it makes me feel almost like it's almost like I'm a teenager again, and I'm feeling like everything's so important. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is good. I'm noting down how they're feeling, and they're like, but the system. I'm like, okay, what about the system? They're like, well, I was picking up these D10 for this thing. I was picking up D10 for that thing, and then more D10. And before I knew it, I had this huge fistful of 10-sided dice, and it felt like so exciting and so overwhelming, and so big. And I was like, okay. And then they said, oh, and then I've took some, and they do something with the dice pool and roll it, and they were like, the emotion and the swell and the way it broke, the way they described it was perfect, absolutely perfect. I was like, this is helping the emotional flavor, the emotional feelings at the table, and it is creating the sort of build and ebb and flow that I was looking for. But then he's like, oh, maybe if we just reduce down the D10s and just take one for each thing, and then I'm only rolling a few. And I was like, you played the other games with smaller pools, like maybe Blades in the Dark or something. I said, do you get that same ebb and flow of emotion from it? It's like, no. And I'm like, okay, then thank you for the feedback. I'll keep the emotional part. But the changes, I'm actually keeping the system that way. And I explained why. And he was like, I get it.
So do you come up with this? Obviously, it's an emotional resonance that you're looking for, and this kind of connection or disconnection within the plans that you have. So I imagine that comes first in design. Where does the mechanical decisions come into how to do this? Is this driven a lot off your own previous experience as to how games work? Or is this, well, I'm just going to try something and see what fits?
Well, usually I sort of sit and I think about it. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's me just, I just know what I want to do with something. So some games I've designed, I've consciously started out and been like, okay, what if this is just a complete free-form role play? And we're just like, you have this role, you have this role, I have this role, and we're just talking and role-playing and setting scenes. And does that work? And usually for me, because for it to be a role-play game, that doesn't have a mechanic to change anything. There's no real levers or we're just playing cops and robbers at that point. And it's like, okay, what do I need to add in to take this in the sort of emotional and narrative directions? How do I fence off some space and open up others? Where's the negative space in my design? What don't I design here? What do I want to leave that the table will be left to gravitate towards and fix for themselves? But how do I do it in a way where people aren't just sat there looking at a bit of a game going, where's the rules here? So, like talking about Lo Thy Dread Empire, the reason it's a war game is the despondence, is the conflict, is the sort of like the dread of it, is sort of like the dread of war, the dread of violence.
That kind of despondence and dread when developing a game where you're dealing with heavier types of emotions, or you're expecting people to not only engage with during play, but to kind of take away from it, but also inject into it from their own, experiences. Looking out on it as someone who's never done a game like that before, mostly on board games, I guess I wonder how hard it is, and whether it's different than other kind of RPG, or narrative driven games. The expectation that you're giving for the players to bring more of themselves to the game versus the game setting the tone for them to play in. It's like, is it 51%, 49%? Are you requiring a level of buy-in on an emotional level? And is that different to other types of RPGs and designing them?
Oh, it's interesting because you mentioned board games, and I think there's actually quite a school of board games that are excellent at designing the emotional landscape that plays around. That you have this board game that people are sitting down to play, and it doesn't say you need to have this level of emotional investment. It doesn't necessarily do much beyond saying this is the theme, this is the art presentation style, these are the systems that the board game uses to set the emotional space.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't see that as different for role-play games. I think the difference is, first up, you're proposing it as a role-play game. So there's already a set of expectations that are shifted slightly from this is a board game, this is a card game, this is a video game, this is a role-play game. So people come in with a slightly different expectation about there's going to be like a tabletop or online tabletop. Yeah, they have a conversation. It's a game based on conversation if it's with multiple people. If it's a solo game, it's a conversation with yourself. And that the game is going to some way interact with that conversation to change the direction it takes. Okay? And so people are coming in with that expectation, and there's conversation sort of... I'm quite a fan of the sort of recent in recent years, we've had sort of the idea of safety tools and safety mechanics come into the world of role-play games, which I think has been a positive thing. And I think like a lot of language as it's developing and a lot of sort of intellectual technology as we're developing it, it's shifting into talking more about conversation, like conversation tools and calibration, and taking that kind of discussion. So with all my games, they all have a little section at the front which borrows from other games and other developers having done this, of sort of discussing the sort of the concept of the game, the aim that you'll have in playing it, the tone that you hope to set at the table, and any subject matter that's likely to come up or be discussed in play. That's called like a CATS sheet in a lot of places, and I find that's quite a good way to set those expectations for play, because if someone's coming in to play like Lo Thy Dread Empire, that's going to be a very different set of expectations to coming in to play The Connection Machine or Chums. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're going from sort of grimdark narrative war game / role play game into weird surrealist science fiction or like kitchen sink drama. And so having those conversation tools, those calibration tools to sort of say, this is where we're coming at it from. And I think we can't ignore the huge amount of work that's came out of mainly the Nordic LARP community, but also sort of freeform and Jeepform LARPs with regard to workshopping before and after games. I think that's now appearing in tabletop games. We're kind of even seeing it in some ways with board games, and the idea that people now do the teach, and the teach being like written into games in a way that rather than just giving you the instruction book, it also links to a teach online or gives you some sort of mini teach booklet. These ideas are sort of permeating through the different design spaces in different ways to set up the sort of like the play area around the game, the feeling around the game, and then what happens during the game, how you as a group will interact with it. And I think that's really, really awesome.
And is that where you sort of came into game design? Because you're saying that you obviously have been doing this for 5 or 6 years and doing self-publishing and all the other bits and pieces that come with it. But is it that seeing something lacking, seeing that, well, this space isn't being filled and I want to fill this in a way that is from these LARPs and things like that? Or has it been more of things that you've seen in the past that you were like, oh, this is great, someone's been able to show this? And if so, what games were they?
Okay, so to be honest, I've been making games for myself since I was about 9 years old. And that's just been something I've done periodically, constantly, ongoing. I actually have, like, on my hard drive, games going back probably like 20 years, 15, 20 years of like random designs that I'll maybe run once or twice for friends. And there's seeds of ideas there, and some of them are better than others. And I think it was maybe about 15 years ago now, I'd set up an indie games club over in Glasgow called Glasgow Indie Gamers. And that was set up because there were lots of different games clubs I was involved in across the city. But there was like, at each club, there'd be like half table or just a table's worth of people, but split across different groups who wanted to play weird little indie games. Okay, most of it was sort of like your big 35, 40 quid, big hardback book games, and a few people wanting to play Dogs in the Vineyard. Mm-hmm. And so it was a way of sort of like getting everyone from everywhere else into one place at one time, and then just playing a bunch of like one-shot games so people got to know one another and then could go away and form their own groups and have fun that way. I had to get one of my games, and I was sort of like talking. There was a group of developers, games designers, publishers, artists around the UK who work together called the Collective Endeavour. And they were independent designers who would club together so that they could table at conventions and demo one another's games and basically punch above their weight. And so a lot of those folks are still kicking around today. they're still involved. Some of them have moved on or vanished from sight, and some of them are still about. But they were all excellent people, and they had like at the time it was very much forum cultures. There's different forums. It was sort of inspired by the indie games booth over at Gen Con that was set up by the Forge people. So I had a game, and I was like, I went up, and that a lot of them were giving me really good advice on like, here's how you publish, this is what you can do, avoid this, do that. Really good sort of info. And it was Malcolm Craig, who's the designer of original Creative A State. There's a new edition of his seminal games.
Hot City Cold War.
Yeah, Cold City Hot
War. Yeah.
Yep. And they're brilliant games, and they still are. I've seen the improvements on them, and wow. Anyway, I was chatting with him. I think other folks had sort of moved on, and we were just chatting away. And he asked me this, and he asked this with kindness. Okay, someone could say this and it could sound quite sarky, but he was doing this with genuine heart and kindness. It was really warm. And he said, like, Tanya, why are you wanting to publish? Because you need to understand why. And I gave some sort of like bubblegum response of like about my game and all this game and da 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 da. He's like, no. You need to know why you want to publish. Because if you want to publish if you want to design your game to have the game, you've already won. You've met your success. You don't have to do anything else unless you really want to. Okay? There's a lot of hassle comes with publishing games. Like something that I say and I've heard from elsewhere is the last 10% of getting that game out into the world takes up 90% of the time. And it's going to be filled with lots of little niggles and hassles and problems. And it's just, you're not going to see what's coming. And it's true that for a lot of the time. And so you have to think about why. Like, do you want to do it just because you want to feel like you're a designer in the club? That's a valid reason. You want to be like, look at my game. Like, understanding why you're doing it and making sure that why can get you through the tough times of publishing. That's what to do. That's what you need to grasp and understand. And I went away and I actually really took a good length of time to think about that. And I thought about it and I thought, no, actually, I've got the game. I'm playing it with my friends. I turn up to conventions and run it sometimes. And I actually don't need to go through the hassle of publishing. I felt I'd won. I had the prize. I was happy. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. That isn't why I was doing it. And so a lot of my games just carried on being played in the background. Then fast forward to 2020, and a close friend of mine who we'd moved apart and we'd lost touch for several reasons. And we'd sort of reconnected a little bit online, but he actually passed away. And we talked about publishing together, and we'd worked on some projects together. Sort of, he'd helped do art for a live action role play festival that I ran. I'd like to get his name in print. I'd like his credit on something. I've got some of the art that he did for some projects in the past. And I could do it as a small zine and just put it out there. That'd be quite easy. But I kind of want to get it on one that has like an okay circulation. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to be talking like D&D, Shadowrun, any numbers like that. I'm talking a small indie success. Just a small one, not a big one. I'm not talking Apocalypse World. I'm not talking Blades in the Dark. I'm talking something small, but I'd like to get it in there. And I knew already, what to get to that level. You can't just turn up. Like, hi Kickstarter, I'd like £10,000 to do the game I have in mind, and it's going to be this and that like one created, zero backed, etc. You see those projects, and they don't take off, and if they do, the people usually haven't got the experience to get them finished. And so I knew I didn't have the experience publishing. Like, I knew how to, I knew that, but I'd not done it. And I think that doing it is important. You have to go through the process of those problems coming up and getting through them. And so I thought about what I wanted to make, and I've been making it. And some of the games I've designed have been designed new because they've been things that have came up. So Be Seeing You came up because someone wanted The Prisoner. The Connection Machine came out of my experiences training to become a counsellor, which I'm in the midst of. And some of the other games that you see actually go back a lot further. And the design for them comes from, like, Lo Thy Dread Empire. The core design from that started years and years before, and started after some questions in chat on the old Story Games forums. We're going back to those forum times. So there was a question posed about, if we take the assumption D&D is born out of wargaming, okay, and that a lot of, at the time, there was still that sort of like story games aren't proper roleplay games, but if we took that seriously and said, what war game would spawn a story game? And so that question has been bubbling in my mind for over a decade at least, and married up with the emotional feelings I had at that point in time, and it came out the way it came out. So
that's great.
Yeah.
You have a new game coming out then for this Zine Quest / Zine excitement. I don't know what they're going to call it. Zine Joy.
Zine Bean.
Zine Bean. Coming out soon. Would you like tell us a little bit about the plans for it at least?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I've got a game that I've created called The Thunder Perfect Mind, which is named after a 2,000-year-old poem. Your viewers can go type that in and find that. It's basically considered, whenever I use the term Gnostic here, it's quite a contested term. Like, Gnosticism is sort of like used as a sort of blanket over a lot of different traditions and thoughts and sort of like semi-related spiritual practices, religions, and sort of poetic movements. So it comes out from a sort of Gnostic position of sort of like presenting this sort of dualistic narrator that sort of puts forward these contrary propositions about themselves and the world that are in contradiction to one another, and through that sort of is trying to challenge you to think about things differently. And I read that poem, and it's sort of the sort of themes sparked with me, and they actually married up with an older design that I'd sort of like tried several times over the years. I tried to rehabilitate Kindred of the East, which is sort of one of the old World of Darkness lines. It has some really nice core ideas, but the sort of Orientalism and sort of racism that comes up in amongst it was always a disappointment, because it has so many good ideas in there that could be salvaged. For my game, I've taken the idea that your characters have died. They've died with their lives unresolved and having some sort of tragic or sort of disappointing action left behind, something that they have nostalgia for, something that they want to go back and sort of put right, or to tend to or look over. But they also had some sort of moment where they had sort of clarity and vision and some sort of almost higher knowledge, some gnosis. And they're sort of caught between the sort of feeling of ascension and the sort of worldly cycle bringing them down. And it sort of draws heavily from a lot of action films. So John Woo's The Killer comes into it. I think that's one of the best action films that's been put out there. It's like Hamlet level. The ending of Hamlet has everybody sort of dying on stage, big soliloquies, lots of like meaningful looks,
but none of them were Joe wielding pistols, and John Woo has solved this.
You don't know that. You weren't there.
if you put them in a white tux, two pistols, doves flying off through the beaming light in a church set. That's brilliant. Yeah, that's it. So it's that sort of breakneck action, but also sort of like the sort of occult thriller type feelings to it. That's sort of like that sort of the idea there's a mystery to be solved to go forward, and then the mystery uncovers more mysteries, and you're trying to look into your past, and you're getting a sort of it's like looking through a misty pane at it. And I think we're living in a time where we've been seeped for over a decade, for probably 20 years or so, in toxic nostalgia. It's built up and built up and built up. It's built up from a sort of like kitsch that's sort of at the side, and sort of it's sort of just a bit kitschy. Like 60s and 70s nights were kind of kitschy and at the side, and in the 60s, sort of looking back to the 50s and rockabilly, and that is kind of built beyond that into a sort of political project. It's part of a sort of far right fascist political ideology to embrace tradition, reject modernity, and all this that sort of spun it into this very toxic look at the past, which has some humorous outcomes. I wanted a game that could like maybe look at that, but I didn't want it to be. I don't think I could just present toxic nostalgia and be like, here, sit with this for a game session. I like games about feelings, and there's a place for that game, but it wasn't the game I wanted. I also wanted to bring in my nostalgia for like playing Vampire the Masquerade and playing that line of White Wolf games in the 90s, and sneaking off to play LARPs and pub basements and as a teenager. And I wanted to critique it as well. I didn't want to just be like, hey, here's the OSR, but for the 90s. Like you've had the OSR for the 70s and 80s, and here's OSR for the 90s. I didn't want to do it quite like that, but it's more sort of like, let's have a look at that time period, and let's look at some of the games from that. So the layout of the zine sort of has some echoes of that time period. The artwork that I've worked with is more modern, but it invokes the same emotional feeling. If I were to use the same artists, say, as White Wolf Splat books, it would just be using nostalgia, plain and simple. But if I use something that gets the same emotional impact, but is got a more is modern, has a different idea, so it's not taking the same direction that White Wolf have. They've went into a sort of more interestingly photoreal direction with their products, a very glossy look. They've kept developing. They've not stagnated entire. Like they've taken their game lines forward, and so it's quite interesting seeing what a company like White Wolf, and under its very different managements and guises, have been doing. Yeah, I'm always interested to see where the big names are going with that sort of thing.
Really interested in seeing it come to fruition as well. It's very exciting. It's coming through to Zine Quest at some point soon.
Oh yeah, launching February 1st. I can give you the link for the doobly-doo. And
we'll put the link in the doobly-doo. Determined. And if people wanted to follow more of what you've done in the past or this in the future, where would be the best place that they could get in contact with you, or at least see what you've been doing?
Yeah. So you can either see all my details at floaker.card.co or floaker.itch.io. That's where you'll find my games.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tanya. It was an absolute pleasure to having you on. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing the new zine. It's going to be great. Thank you for listening to the Ancient Robot Games podcast. As always, I have been Dougal.
And I am Gelb.
And this has been recorded and edited by Ryan Scott. If you liked this, or didn't...
Even if you didn't,
please let us know in the comments, or via email or Pigeon, if you got Pigeon.
Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like us, drop us a line. And if you don't, do this really, really cool thing where you press follow or like. It actually works against us. So we'll still get the message.
Thank you very much for coming and listening with us. And we'll hear you next time.